All right. So you have osteoporosis and you're wondering what are the best type of exercises that I should be doing? Maybe you're wondering what exercises can help improve my bone mineral density, or you're thinking, is exercise even safe for someone like me? So the three types of exercises we're going to talk about is resistance training, balance, and then impact loading slash weight bearing, right? By the way, my name is Hassan Qureshi. I'm an exercise physiologist with over a decade of experience here in Sydney, Australia. And I help people use exercise to better manage their health conditions and live a much fuller life. I'm going to assume you know what osteoporosis is. You know that it's the loss of density of your bones. It's not so much the thickness or the size, but it's how dense they are on the inside, which means how prone they might be to having a fracture if they were exposed to some sort of trauma, right? So the first question that I like to ask my clients is, do you know your numbers? And so the way we measure osteoporosis, the way we know you have osteoporosis is they do a bone mineral density test and they will give you a reading based on other people compared to the norms. And they'll give you a number which is kind of like a ranking in a way, right? So where do you sit on the scale? And if you're below negative 2.5, you're officially considered to have osteoporosis. But that number continues to go below. So if it's -3, your bones are significantly weaker than if it's -1. So this ties into how we can prescribe exercise, what is considered safe and not safe. So knowing your numbers is the first thing. And so that's my first question to people. But also, it's more nuanced than just knowing the number because it's knowing the numbers at each different location that you've been assessed. So if you've had an assessment, chances are you know that you had multiple scans. So your lower back, you might have a particular score. Your hips might be different. Your hands or your arms might be different. So it's about knowing those different numbers at the different locations, which will determine what we can and can't do. Which is a good reminder that whilst this is educational, this is not personal healthcare advice. So please speak to your healthcare professional before commencing any new exercise programs. And so, said differently, I am an exercise physiologist, but I'm not your exercise physiologist. So, in terms of exercise, now we've laid the foundations. Question is, what are the different types of exercise that you can do? So, the three types of exercises we're going to talk about is resistance training, balance, and then impact loading slash weight bearing, right? So I'm going to save the best to last because that's the most important. But the framework that I'm going to be using is stand up, stay standing, and then walk, essentially. So first thing first, resistance training. So resistance training literally means, as it sounds, you're working with some resistance, right? So you're pushing some weights, pulling some weights, pulling some weights, pushing some weights, or you could be using your body weight. So you could be standing up from a chair. Gravity is pulling you down. You're resisting it, and you're standing up. So why do we want to do resistance training? See, bones are connected to muscles. Okay, so when you lift a weight like this is a dumbbell. If I stand there and do a bicep curl, as I'm pulling the weight up, what's happening is my muscles, in this case the biceps, will shorten, right? So there's bicep connected to my forearm and it's also connected to my shoulder, and it will shorten and the weight comes up. Now, as the muscles are shortening, they're pulling the bone literally because they're connected to the bones. They're literally pulling on the bone, kind of like a tug of war, right? And so the bone over time responds and it becomes stronger because that connection point, every action has a reaction type thing, right? So the bone becomes stronger in response to that pulling force. And this applies everywhere, not just bicep curls, but if you're doing a seated row, if you're standing up from a chair, there's different muscles being utilized in that pulling motion and they're pulling on the bone, right? So that's kind of the principle behind it. But also resistance training is the thing that allows you to be able to stand up from chairs and have the strength to be able to lift up things. So that's important. A couple of considerations for people with osteoporosis when it comes to resistance training would be we want to avoid, so it's going to be slow and controlled movements. We're going to avoid ballistic type movements. So, case in point, if I'm going to do bicep curls, I'm going to go slowly up and slowly down, which is generally a good idea for resistance anyway. I'm not going to be going, I'm not going to be going crazy like that. Same thing with postures. I want to try and reduce the risk of any injuries. So if I'm going to be doing seated row, actually, I'll show you. So some people like to do an exercise called a bent over row. So what they'll do is they'll bend over, which I'll show you diagonally. They're bending over and they're pulling a weight to their chest, right? This is a good exercise for people for strengthening your back. However, it involves what I would call an awkward posture, right? So instead of that, I can replicate the benefits of a pulling motion using a TheraBand and a chair. So I'll sit down. I can even sit back if I wanted to, have my back supported, or I'll sit up straight and I'm just pulling this back with both arms. And this allows me to be in a much more, what I would call safer position as far as my back is concerned. So, and then that allows me to go heavier. So if I was using a cable machine, I can lift heavier weights. Have osteoporosis, and many times people forget themselves that they have osteoporosis. Only time you're reminded is if you have some sort of a trauma, for example, a fall, and you break a bone, right? So it becomes important to try and avoid having falls. And so balance training is a way to try and reduce your risk of falling. So the way we do balance training is we basically play with different variables to challenge your balance, right? Challenge your ability to control your body weight. But in response to that, you improve, right? So the first thing I always say with balance training is safety first, right? So that's why here in the clinic, we use parallel bars because it really reduces your risk of falls. If you're not feeling balanced, you can just hold on, right? So safety first is about the setup that you have to try and reduce your risk of a fall. And once you have the setup right, the way we actually do the balance training is, for example, if you bring your feet together or you reduce the amount of surface area that you're using on the floor, it becomes a little bit harder to stand. So using that principle, so narrowing the stance, I can go to tandem stance. So I'm really using a very narrow width, right? And so that becomes harder. If I go to one leg, it becomes harder yet again. And now I'm starting to get a little bit wobbly. Again, don't try this at home by yourself. Seek advice. But this is the sort of stuff that we would do in a clinic, right? And this video is not supposed to be a detailed discussion around balance training, but I'm just sort of illustrating that balance training is an important factor in somebody with osteoporosis. Okay, so number three, we're going to talk about impact loading or weight-bearing exercises, right? So the idea here, similar to what we talked about in resistance training, is this push and pull mechanism, right? So as you go for a walk, right? Let's say you go for a walk. What's happening is you're sending little shock waves with every stride that you take. You're sending a little shock wave through your body, right? And in this context, particularly through the bones. So your bones will respond to that and they will become stronger in response to that stimulus, right? So we can then turn up the dial, and the greater the impact, the greater that response will be in terms of strengthening. Now, this is again where knowing your numbers is really important because if you're quite far advanced in osteoporosis, a little bit of a stimulus can actually be enough to lead to a fracture. But if you're earlier on, then you can get away with a lot more to strengthen your bones. What I mean by that is at the most simplest level, what that might look like is seated heel raises. So you're sitting down, lifting your heels up and down. In a slightly more progressed version, I might do standing heel raises. So I'm standing up and I'm coming up on my tippy toes and I'm actually intentionally dropping down and I'm letting the heels hit the floor hard and I can feel that sort of shock wave through my body. Now, that can then progress to a step up or even just some standing marching. And again, that impact from a height, that could become something like a box jump, something like this. Now, this is again, do not try that at home. But what I'm saying is that this concept of impact and load bearing and impact training has a spectrum. So it can start off really, really slow and it can build up over time. But this really depends on how far advanced your osteoporosis is, which is a great reminder that the best thing to do is to speak to an exercise physiologist. They are the experts when it comes to exercise prescription. They understand your physiology, your medical conditions, and they understand exercise. And so they can design a tailored, personalized exercise program for you, and ideally cover these three different categories of exercise. So that's all, folks. Those are the three main types of exercises that I like to do with people with osteoporosis. If you've liked this video, if you learned something from it, please don't forget to like and share it. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments below, and I'll try and respond to them as quickly as we can. And of course, if we can be of any help, whether you'd like to work with us directly, please reach out through the website or find us on the socials and hit us up. We'll be happy to help.